today we're going to start on the senses. We're going to cover taste and smell. Those are two of the five senses that we have. These senses fall under what is known as the peripheral nervous system, or it's abbreviated as the PNS. Last semester we talked about the central nervous system, or the CNS, which is your brain and spinal cord. And so the peripheral nervous system is everything else. These are all the other nerves that you find around your body that kind of help you detect your sense of touch or pain. So the PNS basically includes anything outside of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so the first sense that we're going to go over is going to be the sense of smell. So we're going to sketch out something that pretty much everybody enjoys smelling, which is a nice, pretty flower. Which I know my flower's the prettiest. So we have a flower, and we're gonna have kind of a side view of a person here. A very strange chin, but that's okay. All right, so we have our person, and they are trying to smell this flower. And so the way that you smell is by these little tiny particles that actually leave the flower and make their way up into your nose. And those particles are known as odorants. These odorants, those are the fancy term, or that's the fancy term for odor molecules. So these odorants are particles that you find in the air, and these particles are released by stuff. So that stuff, for example, in our picture is a flower. When you get a new puppy and all of a sudden you smell poop, and you're looking for the poop, guess what? Those are odorants or particles released by the poop that have made their way through the air and all the way up into your nose. So you literally have poop particles in your nose, and that's what allows you to smell. So it's these particles that were released that are going to trigger your sense of smell. And then the fancy word for your sense of smell is known as olfaction. So in order for olfaction to really occur, those particles have to be detected by nerves all the way up at the very top part of your nasal cavity. This is where you're going to find kind of like your olfactory bulb. So if you remember, your first cranial nerve was kind of like little, I don't know, kind of like little fingers sticking out at the very front of your brain. They sat right underneath your brain. So that olfactory bulb actually sits right on top of one of your cranial bones, which is known as your ethmoid, or actually your facial bone. And then out through that bone you have tiny little nerves that kind of go through. So we're going to sketch out a close-up picture of what's really going on there. Okay, so we're going to start with the olfactory bulb. It looks kind of like a hot dog. So you have the olfactory bulb. And so this cranial nerve, which is your first cranial nerve, sits on top of a bone, which is known as the ethmoid bone. And we're going to draw kind of like a boxy structure. We're going to leave a couple spaces. And you'll see why here in a second. Okay, so you have the olfactory bulb, which is in the cranial cavity. So right up here, you'd have your brain, which, you know, kind of looks like weird spaghetti. And here you have your ethmoid bone. Okay, so you have nerves that connect the olfactory bulb to the outside world. We're going to draw these nerves having different receptors. There are different little shapes here at the ends. So these receptors, or these nerves, are known as olfactory hairs. This is where the odorants, or the odor molecules, are actually going to come and attach so that they can be sensed. Okay, so these receptors, these olfactory hairs, they need to be protected because they are in contact with the outside world, and you don't want them to dry out. So they're going to have something known as a mucus layer. So it's going to be this kind of gooey substance that's going to help protect those olfactory hairs. This is your mucus, which I may have misspelled, that's okay. Your mucus layer. So the odorants are going to, once again, make their way up into your nose. So let's say this is your nose over here. They're going to travel, and let's say the particles look something like this. So they're going to cross the mucous membrane, and they're going to bind to the appropriate olfactory hair. So basically they're just going to, you know, kind of float around, and if they match one of your olfactory hairs, then you're going to get a signal, and that action potential, that signal is going to travel this way, and it's going to come through the olfactory bulb, down the olfactory tract, and then it's going to make its way to your brain, to your olfactory regions, where it's going to be processed. And then, okay, now I know that I'm smelling a flower, or okay, now I know I'm smelling pizza or poop, or somebody just farted, and you know, I have fart particles that went up my nose, and that's why I can smell, or that's why I can smell that they farted. Okay. So we're going to go through, and we're going to write down these steps. So you have the visual version, and now we're going to go through and we're going to write it out. All right, so step 1 is that the odorants are going to be released into the air by stuff. So whatever that stuff is, can smell nice or maybe not so nice. All right, the second step is going to be that the odorants are going to make their way into your nasal cavity, and then from there they're going to diffuse into that mucous membrane so that they can bind to the olfactory hairs. Something important to point out about the olfactory hairs is going to be that each olfactory hair or neuron is going to have just one type of receptor or one type of hair. So if you think back on our picture, we drew the little hairs or the little receptors having different shapes at the bottom. And so that kind of shows you that each hair is made for just a specific type of chemical. So if we think about, let's say, pizza, Okay, so pizza has different ingredients, and each one of those ingredients is going to release different chemicals into the air. And so there's going to be lots of hairs that are going to be triggered. And so your brain is going to decipher which neurons, which hairs are being triggered. And that's what lets your brain know, okay, I'm smelling pizza, or I'm smelling a burger, or I'm smelling that cologne that I really like. Okay, so then the next thing, or the third step, is going to be the activation or the processing. So when a specific olfactory hair or a receptor is activated, it's going to cause an action potential to happen, or a signal, if you kind of think back about last semester. So that's the way that messages are sent. So the neuron is going to have an action potential that's going to travel to the olfactory bulb. And from this olfactory bulb, it's going to make its way down to the olfactory tract. And then it's going to go to the brain. And it's going to go to a very specific area of the brain, which is known as the olfactory cortex. This area of the brain is pretty important. It's going to process not just your sense of smell, but it's also going to trigger memories and emotions for you. So this kind of plays a role of kind of learning your lesson from certain things. Like let's say that you had really bad shrimp one time, and you can, so maybe from that moment on, anytime that you smell shrimp, you kind of remember that really bad experience that you had. And so you're going to probably stay away from shrimp. Or the first time that you that you smelled sour milk. So you're going to remember what that smells like, so that in the future you can recognize it in case you drank it the first time and you didn't know what that was or what that smell was. So it's pretty important that it's going to trigger, like I said, emotions and memories. Those memories or emotions can also be good. They don't just have to be, bad things. Maybe flowers remind you of, someone that you really care about or something like that. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to go over for smell is a little bit of a statistic. We have about 40 million different types of receptors. So 40 million different receptors. I'm going to kind of abbreviate that. So this is going to translate into us being able to ID or identify about 10,000 different smells. Okay, so remember, everything pretty much has or is made of a combination of things, or a combination of odorants. There are other animals that have a really, really good sense of smell. We are not one of them. We're okay, but definitely not the best at the sense of smell. Okay, and then the last part that we are going to go over for this set of notes is going to be our sense of taste. Taste and smell are very, very similar. So first thing for taste is that it also has a fancy word for this sense, which is gustation. Hopefully from the little Skittles taste test, I guess, you saw that it was kind of hard to determine the flavor of the Skittle whenever you weren't able to smell. Or you might notice that if you have a really bad nasal congestion, your taste is not that good. So things might be kind of bland for you. And that is because taste for the average person is about 80% smell. Okay. We have about 10,000 taste buds scattered all over our tongue and our upper throat. So you find them in your tongue, upper throat. And I'm just going to write so that maybe it can go a little faster. Sorry, my screen keeps minimizing. Okay, so these taste buds that you find around your tongue, you're going to find them between the bumps. So if you look at your tongue, you can kind of see that it has little bumps, and those bumps are known as papillae. So your taste buds, I'm going to draw a picture here in a second. These are between the papillae or papillae that you find in your tongue. So you have kind of grooves. So you would see this part here. This would be the top part of your tongue. So in there, you have the taste buds, which are these little dots that I'm drawing. All right, so the next thing for taste is the 5 things that we can taste, I guess, the 5 categories. You probably already know most of them. Okay, so we have sweet, sour, salty, bitter. And then the last one that's a little more recent is known as umami. Sometimes you hear it pronounced as unami. Either one works for me. This one is savory, or yummy. Okay. One of the biggest things that I want you to understand when it comes to taste is where can you sense taste. Okay, so if you think back, maybe like elementary school or something, at some point in your life you may have heard something about a taste map. So maybe that you use the tip of your tongue for tasting salty, meaning that if you put something sour at the tip of your tongue, you wouldn't be able to taste it. Okay, but that is not true. That is not the case. You're actually able to register all taste, so all 5 categories, any part of your tongue. So you register in all parts. And so this is very important because I promise you I'm going to ask you something about this. And we're actually going to do a lab towards the end of, at the end of this unit, that we're going to test this. So this is a myth. So tongue, so map is myth. All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to sketch out kind of what a taste bud looks like and how the different particles and stuff that get in your mouth are or that you're able to taste them. Okay, so we're going to start with the surface of the tongue. We're just going to draw something like this. And we're going to leave the space. You actually have kind of pores or holes on the surface of your tongue, which are known as taste pores. And that gives access to little particles known as tastants to make their way into your taste buds. Okay, so kind of like for olfaction, you're going to have little particles from, the different things that you're eating that are going to be dissolved in your saliva. And these food particles have to make their way to your taste buds so that you can actually taste them. So food particles have to be dissolved. All right, so instead of taste bud, I put a gustatory cell. So gustatory cells are the ones that make up your taste buds. And these are the ones that are going to do, I guess, the tasting. So these tastants make their way through the taste pore, which is this little section here. And they're going to have access to the taste bud. So your taste bud looks almost like an onion. And draw little hairs. And then one without. And then another one with. And then the last one without. So these are cells, so we're going to give them a nucleus. And the ones with hairs, we're going to have stuff in them that you can see a little bit easier. And then at the base, we're going to have 2 more cells. Okay. So this whole thing is known as a taste bud. So it's a collection of gustatory cells as well as support cells. Okay, so the ones with the hairs, so this one and this one, these are your actual gustatory cells. So you have about 50 to 100 gustatory cells per taste bud. So these are the ones that register taste. And then the ones that are around the gustatory cells, so the ones that don't really have anything, they're just kind of there. These are known as your support cells. And they do exactly what their name says. They're just there kind of for support, to kind of keep things in place. All right, and then the bottom 2 cells here, these are known as basal cells. Kind of like they're in the basement membrane, if you remember that, the bottom layer. Okay, so their job is to replace gustatory cells, which I'm going to abbreviate, about every 1 to 2 weeks. Okay, so your mouth goes through a lot of things, a lot of wear and tear. You know, think about every time that you eat, you kind of also eat some of your own cells, right? So those cells have to be replaced in order to keep them kind of fresh. And there's other things that can also cause your cells to be, or have to be replaced sooner. Think about if you eat something that's really, really hot and you kind of burn your tongue. You kind of lose your sense of taste in that little area for a little while, but it typically comes back. So that's because of those basal cells. They're kind of there to kind of help replace them. Okay, and then I went ahead and zoomed out for the last part of the gustation sense, or gustatory. So this taste bud is going to be connected to nerves or neurons. So I'm going to draw these in blue. So you have a neuron or neurons. Okay. So the way that taste works is very similar to that of smell. Okay, so there's going to be different action potentials, or action potentials are going to be generated differently based on what you are tasting. Okay, so let's say that you tasted something. So this neuron is going to start an action potential, which is the fancy word for a message or a signal. And this message is going to be activated differently based on what tasted or what thing you just tasted. Okay, so for example, when you eat something that has sour stuff, that action potential is going to be started differently than when you eat something that's sweet. Um, so we're not going to go into the chemistry of all of that. That has to do with, ions and all this other stuff, kind of a chain reaction. The basic thing that I want you to know is that it's activated differently based on the tastent. Okay, and so then this information, so the information is going to go to the gustatory cortex. Okay, so cortex should be the hint. That's the area of the brain that is responsible for the kind of deciphering of these messages. So that's what's going to tell you, okay, let's say if you closed your eyes and you weren't, smelling and you just ate a piece, it's going to tell you, okay, I just ate a Kit Kat or something like that. So that's where this information is processed. Okay, so both smell and taste work very, very similarly. They're, basically just going to be deciphering little particles that come in contact with either your gustatory cells or your olfactory hairs and all that stuff. Okay, so hopefully you're able to get all that. If not, just let me know and I will be here to help you.